Hello, everybody, and welcome to this, the hottest and spiciest Warhammer 40,000 podcast out there, the Large Blast podcast. I'm your host, Stoney, and I'm joined, as always, by Welshie and Matt. Say hello, Welshie and Matt.
Never join the crowd.
And you're very lucky to join us on this, the 50th episode of the Large Blast podcast, making us the longest-running Warhammer 40,000 podcast in existence.
No, it isn't. What about Lorehammer?
And we like to kick things off here with a little something we call Hobbies Goings On, where we take a little look at some of the goings on that's been happening in some of the hosts' lives. So who wants to kick things off? Matt, Welshie, have either of you had any goings ons worth mentioning?
I had a busy week in the Warhammer terms. Last episode, I think I was telling you I was on the panels on the big night. So I did a bit of that, and that's very slow. You really got to take your time. So I got a bit bored of that, and I just exploded into 4 separate things all happening at once. So I'm painting up some Gene Stealers. I'm painting up the next unit of Noise Marines. I built and painted a Achilles Ridge Runner, and I've started kit bashing some Tyrannid Monster. So I just went from I needed to explode, my hobby juices were flowing. And I needed some
very sort of tight work because you're doing all this kind of Renaissance style painting all over this knight's panels, aren't you? So
yeah, it's like 7 shades of slightly lighter flesh color over the top of each other at tiny scale. So yeah, I've been enjoying most of its contrast, actually, just slapping on the contrast. It's a nice break.
And are you getting these Gene Stealers ready for some this Gene Stealer cult codex that's come out? That's a bit nice, isn't it? You trying to beef up your forges.
Yeah. So the Ridge Runner is for the new forces. I've got another Ridge Runner on the way. I've got some Atlan Jackals on the way. I loved playing the Gene Stealer cult codex up till it kind of got a bit rubbish. So I'm really excited to be able to play it. I just love the trickery. It's why I play Raven Guard. I don't like the super OP shooting. I love being able to pop stuff up all over the place, and the kind of shadow play is great
Get
fun.
Sneaky with it.
The Gene Stealers I've done this week specifically, they're just an extra present for our friend Alex, who I'm playing his Death Guard army tomorrow. And I've gone with an army list that's essentially you could never have too many Gene Stealers.
Oh, excellent! I don't know why people don't use that. That's how I'd play them. Yeah.
So I found like 6 that were primed but not painted. So I've just chucking on some dry brushing for tomorrow.
Cool. So Matt, what have you been up to?
Well, I've had the opposite. I've hardly done any Warhammer. I'm still inching my way through the old Grimaldus model. But actually, I did over a week ago. I bought a vortex mixer. People use them to shake their paints, and people use them in chemistry to mix things. And
like that little button, you push it on and it sort of vibrates it around, kind of thing.
Yeah. And they seem to be a bit of a fad online. And
have you put your ball bag on it?
Oh, I was going to ask that. I'm just waiting for the right moment.
Because you really have to press into it to turn it on.
Oh, okay.
So I don't think that would be
very need to adjust the settings.
Yeah, it's all right. You definitely don't need to get one. But,
here's a question regarding balls and paints, though, Matt. Do you ball bearing your paints? Have you moved to that point?
I've done that ever since I've had the contrast paints. I put, but not in the other ones. Although they say people do say the ball bearing works better with the vortex mixer, but I don't know. I've got my Imperial Guard Armored Company is made up colours, and I've still got them paints made up from like 15 years ago.
Right.
And I've used them
home mixes, like 50% one thing and another, and it's still liquid. Yeah. Wow, that's good.
well, it's very dry liquid, which is why I bought the vortex mixer, because I have a Baneblade that I want to build and a Basilisk, Forge World Basilisk that I want to build, and the vortex mixer I found for 30 quid on eBay, and it was rated pretty well on YouTube. So I thought,
great for dicks.
Great for dicks. Great for paints.
Doesn't work on balls.
Yeah. So hopefully I can replenish these paints and get on with a tank. The rumor is this new Imperial Guard tank coming out. But let's see what happens.
There was a rumor engine of a tire that looked very Rough Ridery to me. Did you see that one? A proper knobbly rubber tire.
Rough Rider. Oh man, I think the Rough Riders will come back as bikers. Be excellent. What about you, Stoney?
As you guys know, I've been getting on with some Gene Stealer cult stuff for my corporate Gene Stealer cult that I've got going on. And one of the things I think I talked about was how I made my neophytes heads by sort of resculpting the Gaunt Summoner head in 3 different ways. And then I'd cast it and was using that. But to be honest with you, 3 different poses doesn't go very far over 10 men. You know, it looks a bit like normally when you buy a pack of heads, you get like 5 or something, don't you? So you might get a repeat. But so I'm kind of thinking like, well, what I did do is I made some basic heads on ZBrush, a couple of extra ones, and got them printed. So I've got another couple of heads and popped off some of the other ones and put on these extra ones. So now there's 5 heads amongst the team, if you get me, and it looks a bit more how you would expect it to look. But one of the things that I had was I had cat problems again. Long-time listeners will know that my cat is a troublesome bastard, and he'll get up in my shit whilst I'm doing stuff. And I lost one of my heads, one of my 3D printed heads. I can't for the life of me find it because he knocked it off the fucking table. I was pissed off, but instant retribution happened because after I couldn't find it, I went to take a piss. I didn't realize the door, I've got a sliding door, it was open a little crack. And the cat came in, tried to jump up on the sink, but just ran straight through my piss stream. And as a result, I pissed down all over the flank of the cat moments after he lost my Games Workshop model. So that, you know, some kind of swift karma came about. But I'm going to have to get just one head reprinted, which is really annoying because I don't have a 3D printer myself. So, you know, sending away for just one head is very frustrating.
You could say it was the curse of the 4-armed emperor.
Cut it out. It's the news. Wow. It's the chuffing news.
Have you heard 6s are now 4s?
It's the news.
Gene Stealer Limo's back.
News. First piece of news is we've got some spicy new terrain sets coming out. We've got like a bit of a radar dish and some kind of landing pad. It's just your box with barrels around it, basically, as we've come to know and love and respect. So what do you guys think about these? Do these have any kind of rules based around them as well?
They do.
They do. Yeah. We'll mention in a chapter, when we talk about chapter approved in a second, how fortifications are re-changing. But the thing I liked about these, we don't really play much Crusade just because it takes a while to jump in. If you use these on your table when you're playing Crusade, you can kind of get bonus Crusade points for buffing up your army if they manage to utilize these bits of terrain in your game, which I thought was quite a nice, fluffy introduction to the game.
So are these kind of aside from kind of command point scoring areas or anything like that? This is just a nice little, you might run some guys into the old Burger King and everyone gets +1 toughness from all the breadsticks or whatever. Yeah,
kind of. Yeah, you can, like, if they manage to do stuff on them during your game when it comes to upgrading your armies for your next Crusade game, you get more stuff, which I think is quite nice. Well,
the radar dish I think is cool, and actually, like, you know, obviously straight away you could put that on the back of an Imperial Guard tank and turn that into some cool like HQ or whatever. But it reminds me of a Lego set, the facade of a radar station without actually being a radar station. Like, there is almost no terrain in this terrain set. It's just a
I do kind of know what I mean. It is a bit like
post.
a radar, sort of a radar dish, kind of just on a post, you know. And then, to be honest with you, the other thing, this sort of landing pad thing we're looking at here, it's just kind of like a box with some barrels attached to the side of it. If that picture was in a White Dwarf from 10 years ago with like, now this is how you make this out of an old shoebox or whatever, you wouldn't be that surprised, would you? Do you know what I mean?
I know what you're saying. What you want is the radar dish on top of an old Gothic cathedral. That's the trick.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the beauty of the kits are that, yeah, you can slap it on something else, and I'm sure a lot of the terrain kits are quite clever that you can combine them quite easily. They do design them with that in mind. So, yeah, combine this with other stuff, and it'd be really cool. But on its own,
to be fair, I mean, you know, it's one of those kind of things, isn't it? You're either a player that plays with, that also makes terrain, because terrain building is its own thing, you know, like there's army customization or whatever, but you're either a guy who's got a whole bunch of their homemade terrain and that's what they're into, or you're a guy that buys every piece of plastic terrain or whatever. And if you're one of those guys that buys every piece of plastic terrain, then this is probably interesting to you because it's a little bit of variety. It's something a bit different from what we have. At least you've got a radar dish and a clean Xbox or whatever. It's something a bit tasty. So, there's something for some 40k players here. New chapter approved coming out in the next couple of weeks, and we've got some points changes coming across a whole bunch of different models.
A whole raft of point decreases across the board. I wondered whether this is like a build-up for the Tau coming out, and so yeah, your Leman Russ is 10 points cheaper, so you can get an extra Leman Russ in your army because you're going to shot off.
You get one shot off turn 1 and turn 2 now.
And this of course would have included the AdMech points changes increases, but they moved that forward in time. So now consequently AdMech are not in this, which I'm relieved about. Though I do, as an AdMech player, I do wonder where we'll be after all these points changes and the Tau and Custodian Codex comes out, because it could be that suddenly we've been left behind quite a bit. I don't know, but
I think that could happen.
They all seem pretty good.
These ones that we're looking at, we should say, if you're listening to this in the future, are only the ones that Warhammer community previewed. So there may well be more in the chapter approved book.
That's true.
I'm genuinely really excited by pretty much all of these, like the Storm Speeders and the Gladiators. I've got 3 of them in my Raven Guard army, and they've kind of been unplayable, so that's great. And then there's like a whole heap, like my whole Necron army's
stuff.
gone down.
It's insane.
I run 2 Doomsday Arcs, so that's 20 points. I run 2 Heavy Destroyers, that's an extra 10. I've got 6 Scorpex, that's an extra 30 points. I've got a Monolith, that's an extra 60. I've just made like over 100 points on my 2,000 point list.
So think about our Christmas game where my points increase had come in. So we had a 3,000 point AdMech versus 3,000 point Necron game, and my points increases had already come through. My 1,000 point army went up 110 points. So 3,000 army went up by like 300 points, and you would have gone down by like, let's say 300 points. That is
not quite that much,
massive.
But yeah, it's
massive.
big.
That's massive. Yeah.
So the other thing in chapter approved, boys, was, other than the points, a few big changes to the way you play the game that have been previewed. Even better for the Monolith, having just gone down 30 points. Now, if you bring a super heavy, for you, Stoney, that's old school Lord of War, it used to cost you command points. But now, if it's the same faction as your army, it gives you command points.
Yeah, I think that's good.
So, I'm genuinely thinking about bringing Monoliths more. So that's lovely. The second point is fantastic for competitive play, I think, and that's no sub-faction mixing. So whereas before, the key word that overruled your army would have been Adeptus Astartes, and then chapter fell within that. Chapter falls first. So you can't have Iron Hands mixed with Salamanders anymore. You can't have all 3 crazy factions of the Dark Eldar together on the same board, so that your opponent has no idea what's happening because they can't keep track of 3 sets of rules. I think that's nice and streamlined and will make competitive play better.
Yeah. I mean, this is GW giving the neckbeard a bit of a trim, This is it's that sort of time. But the only thing that I just hope that it doesn't count for chaos so much, where you can still have demons and chaos things, because that is always thematically very cool.
They've already clarified that, so your marks of and your demon alliance, or whatever the rule's called now.
Nice.
There is space for that, and Gene Stealer cults and guard. There's space for that.
Yeah, cool. Keep the fluffy
excellent.
stuff. Keep the fluff. Get rid of the beard. That's how we trim a neck.
Then the other changes are, there are 2 primaries now in each mission. So there's no mission secondary, but there's 2 primaries, which is good because it means you're both focusing on the same 2 things, which is nice. And you can only have 1 secondary from your codex out of the 3 optional secondaries, which again, Space Marine players had 2 books to pick their 3 just stupid. So again, that's great. But the real interesting stuff, we have bashed fortifications a lot when the kits come out and gone, why the hell would I want to play that? Where do you even put it? It doesn't even make any sense. Big rules change here. If you turn up to a competitive tournament now with a fortification and you can't place it on the board, 3 inches away from the scenery that's already there, which is most boards, you can take a piece of scenery off of your board and replace it with your fortification.
No way.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's insane. That's ridiculous. Hang on. That's insane. I mean, that they're going to be in like every army. I think.
Maybe.
I mean, I think that's a massive advantage.
Are they that
Is it?
game changing? These bits of scenery.
Well,
I mean,
It's just the fact that something that you can choose to have in your army can manipulate a board that you have no control over. So suddenly you have control over the board.
Well,
If it's in your deployment zone, it's not that big a deal.
I think I see your point there, but I think if you think about the kind of bits of scenery that you're going to find preventing you from placing a fortification, it's going to be a kind of large ruin thing. And let's be honest, the size of most of the fortifications isn't as big as a ruin. So the downside is you're losing a whole ruin from your deployment zone potentially. So that's a bit of a toss up. Most people don't have these. I don't think even competitively people will start bringing them because it's not fun, is it? It's not fun to put down a building.
Games Workshop want to sell scenery at the end of the day. They want it to be more useful. They want it to be more thematic, a battlefield that comes alive and you've got things going on. You know, let's see how it goes, I guess. If they suddenly introduce some super broken piece of scenery where you can just load a bunch of like 50-point cultists into it and they suddenly get fucking rocket launchers or something, then you've got a problem. But at the moment, it doesn't seem like any of the scenery is that overpowered.
The only thing that I think it could be kind of abused with is it kind of makes taking to the last as a secondary. If it counts for to the last and you've just put down like a 40 wound fortification, you're guaranteeing yourself some victory points there.
New Tile Codex is on the horizon, so grab your guns and get ready for a fight. But where's it going to happen? Is it Sector C, Sector A? Well, let's find out now, because it turns out that there's Tau from all over the place, and they're a bit like chapters from different sectors they come from. So what do these new rules mean for us humble 40k players, Welshie?
Well, it means before you get your army shot off the board by turn 2, you'll be able to have the Tau player explain the various sects and sectors and Tau culture. Maybe they'll bring a pamphlet to try and win you over to the greater good before the game begins.
It kills the time. You're not going to be there for long, so you're going to get shot off. So, yeah, fair play.
On a more serious note, it's proper thematic. And actually, if I was a Tau player, God forbid, I would really enjoy this. So instead of, you can build a custom Tau sept where you pick 2 rules, like a lot of the codices, and that you can build your own custom set from picking 2 rules. But with the Tau stuff, your 2 rules have to come from rules that are assigned to neighboring space sectors. So you can't have like a rule that suits a Tau group on one side of their area of space and a rule from the complete opposite. They have to kind of be near each other. And apparently there's like 4 rules per sector. Games Workshop said there's 100 ways to combine 2 rules to make your own specific set.
I just can't get cheap Scottish lager out of my head.
What?
They're all the Tau drinking cans of Tennant's lager and they're rolling around.
Bro, what are you talking about, man?
I don't like this at all. This is not very Tau. I mean, they have to do this because it's rules for the Codex.
I think this is cool. Different sectors undoubtedly mean things like cool new paint schemes, stuff like that. So, yeah, I think this is cool in the long run. That could be quite interesting. Get rid of the ochre colour. Stop me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that the Kroot are getting a bit of a buff in their close combat statistics.
Their stat line, I believe, is buffed. And also, because there's a lot more option now for flavour of ways to play Tau with the rules you pick, you can make a more, dare I say it, close combat Tau army that is quite heavy on the Kroot that we... I think we all know if we were forced to play Tau, it would be 100% Kroot. If someone was like, you've got to go to a tournament and you've got to turn up with 1,000 points of Tau.
Yeah, I'd do that.
They'd be all
You
Kroot.
have a Tau army, Welshie, and you
It's
made
orcs.
it out of orcs.
I don't know what you're on about.
Rolling in my 6-4.
And now, in honour of the 50th episode of what some people are already calling the world's longest running Warhammer 40,000 podcast, we're proud to present to you an interview with Mr. James Swallow, a Black Library author responsible for such classics as Flight of the Eisenstein, Dios Sanguinius,
No way!
Nemesis,
I love that
The
one.
Hidden Dagger,
He never did.
and countless others.
Some of my favourites.
Not to mention being a BAFTA-nominated king amongst nerds, responsible for all your favourites, from Star Trek
Beam
to
me
Doctor
up.
Who.
I don't know anything about
If you
that one.
like it, chances are he's probably helped write it. So without further ado, let's have a chat with Mr. James Swallow. So books, they're like movies but in your brains, and we're joined today by somebody that knows a little something about both movies and books, Mr. James Swallow.
Hey guys, good to be here.
And what we like to do when we first get an author on the show is to try to throw some rapid fire questions at them, just to kind of get your quickest response possible, hopefully to try to get you to spill some secrets about the Black Library, but we'll see. So Welshie, do you want to take us away?
I'll kick us off. Yeah. So number one, what is your least favorite 40k faction?
Orcs.
Orcs, okay.
Did Magnus do anything wrong?
Magnus who? I don't know who that guy is.
Who is your favorite Primarch?
Oh, well, Sanguinius, obviously. You know, it's the long hair that I love.
Yeah.
Best Games Workshop model?
The one that my favorite of all time is like, do you remember the original Power Armor figure? The sort of blobby Michelin man dude?
Yeah.
I'm really going, right, this is a really deep cut. But I always loved that one. I still have mine somewhere in my pile of miniatures.
Amazing.
Oh, excellent.
Okay, so he might be your favorite, but who wins in a fight? Is it Sanguinius or Mortarion?
I don't know really. I'm gonna say Sanguinius because he's my guy, but I think it will be a close run thing.
Yeah. It's the better hair, it's the maid.
Yeah.
Is the Emperor a god?
Depends on your point of view.
No
Very
giveaways there.
diplomatic. Yeah.
Next question then. Which faction would you most like to write but haven't?
Oh, that's a good one. Maybe the Legio Titanicus, maybe, or the Mechanicus. They might be fun. Yeah. I've done a little bit. I've done some Mechanicus characters. I think about it actually, but like maybe kind of drilling deep into that. Or maybe the Arbites would be interesting to just write about that.
No, a whole Arbites novel would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. Could Garrow ever be corrupted?
Never.
Could the Borg survive in 40k?
I think they do. I think they get on pretty well there. Actually, I think they probably fit quite nicely. You know.
Ooh, new faction.
Yeah. I quite like to see. Either that or they kind of team up with the Necrons with kind of like aesthetic similarity in some of their designs and stuff.
Last question then. Which is the scariest Xenos?
I think the Tyranids, really, because it's just like, that rapacious kind of force of nature. It's like, you can't argue with a hurricane, right? There's nothing you can reason with. It's just like, it's going to eat you, it's going to poop you out and make more of itself. They're pretty terrifying.
And nothing worse than being sucked up a tube.
Well, I was going to ask James. You mentioned the original power armored Space Marine in your collection. What's your personal backstory with Warhammer? How did you become aware of Warhammer? Did you ever play Warhammer?
Yeah. My 40k origin story. Yeah. Okay. So I remember I used to go to all the game stores in London. Whenever I would wander into London, I did this circuit around all the comic shops and game stores. And the original GW store down in Dowling Road, much hallowed is that holy place, but that was one of the places that I would always go to. So I was always going into GW before Warhammer was a thing. And I remember the release of Rogue Trader and how we were all kind of totally blown away by what is this new thing. But I remember the time before that, when in the before times when the miniatures were coming out, and it was the first sort of like Imperial kind of soldiers and the early genesis of the ideas that you saw in tabletop games like Laser Burn and that kind of thing. Some of the ideas of what would eventually become kind of Warhammer. So I was playing a little bit of that. I had a lot of friends who were minis gamers. I was more of an RPGer than I was a minis gamer. So I tended to play in other people's games. And I had a friend who was a serious Eldar fan when the original Rogue Trader edition came out. And his mum was a music teacher at a school. And so we got to sneak into the school on weekends. And they had this huge music room with this like soft kind of floor. And we basically, we would just hear him and fight these massive 40k battles. I had my remember the big plastic Space Marines box? The original.
Yeah.
I had all my plastic Space Marines, and he had his Eldar. We had another guy who played Orcs, and he had this polystyrene castle model, which I think was an original Warhammer Fantasy thing.
Yeah, I think I remember that with the little crenellations popping out.
Yeah, that's the one.
The corners. Yeah,
so we would use that scenery and stuff, and then we would just fight backwards and forwards. We had this epic sort of 40k battle. So that was my kind of original kind of connection with the franchise. But because I lived in a small flat and I didn't have a lot of room, so I didn't do mini gaming because it just took up too much space, right? So all I had was just like my RPG background stuff. So I played it for a while, and then I kind of fell out of that particular game. And then a few years later, when I was looking to sort of build up my writing career, I've been working as a journalist writing for entertainment magazines. So I knew the franchise, I knew the kind of a bit of the lore. And there was a guy I knew who was doing short fiction for Inferno. I remember chatting to him, and he was really dismissive about it. And he said, "Oh, I've just done this story. Oh, you know, the guys at Black Library, they'll buy any old stuff." And I thought, that's a bit unfair. And he was obviously he wasn't doing it because he was for the love of it. He was just doing it to earn a quick buck. And I thought, you know, I remember that franchise. I remember it being pretty cool. I'm pretty sure if this guy could do a story for it, I could do a story for it. So I read up a few issues of Inferno, and it kind of rekindled, you know, this dormant love I had for the franchise. So I pitched them a few story ideas. My first one was a Doom Eagles story, actually. It has the Doom Eagles and the Flesh Terrors, and that was a story called Crimson Knight. I sold that to them, and the rest is history.
Nice. So should we jump into a little bit more of a kind of lore and background then of some of your writing? So you obviously had the amazing opportunity to write about one of the massive focus points in 30k lore, and obviously the events from that spin out even now into 40k. So what was that like, jumping in after those first 3 books of the Horus Heresy to take this story out into the wider universe?
I've told this story a couple of times, but I like telling it again. It's growing into telling it. I was, you know, remember at the beginning of Dan's book, beginning of Horus Rising, says I was there the day that the Emperor was killed. I was there the day we had the first meeting about the Horus Heresy. Right? And I remember Mark Gascoigne, who was the editor at the time, now gone over to work at Aconite Books, but he's, you know, a really terrific editor, one of the best ones I've ever worked with. He brought us into this meeting. I can remember now. I remember Ben Counter was there. I think Chris Dowes was there. Was it Chris Dowes or was it? No, it wasn't Chris Dowes. It was somebody else. I forget exactly who was there. It was a whole bunch of them. And they said, we're going to do the Horus Heresy, and we were all like, what? It's like, and some of us were like, really? Are you sure? Is that like a good idea? Because it was this mythological kind of part of the universe, and it had never been nailed down, you know, and it was just surrounded by this air of mystery. It's like, do we really want to do this? Do we really want to codify this Ur mythology of the universe? And once we set it in stone, you know, we'll never be able to go back and change it. But the more we talked about it, the more we were like, this is a unique opportunity to write something that has shaped that entire franchise, and not only just retell the story that we know, but bring loads of really cool new stuff to it. And I think it was Dan who said, you know, the key thing about this is not to just show people the story they know, but say the story you think you know is not the story that happened.
Yeah.
And that's been gone through the heresy all the way through. It's like, you know, history says X, Y, Z happened, but it's not that way. You know, there's a different twist to it, or you thought this was going this way, but it's actually heading in a totally different direction. And that was a really fun, unique challenge. So we had the first bunch of ideas laid out, and they said to me, you know, we want you to do the Flight of the Eisenstein, which is this, you know, there aren't that many key points in the Horus Heresy lore where we go, this point, this thing happened exactly at this place. There's a lot of vague bits. It's kind of like putting flags in in the desert, the sand dunes move, you're not exactly sure exactly where it is. But that's one of the few points where we knew exactly what happened. And what kind of caught my eye was the idea of that this is not a story about the warning, it's a story about one man. It's a story about Nathaniel Garrow. Once I realized, this is his story, if I make it about him, everything orbits around that, and it tells the story in a very personal and very compelling way. Because the thing was, the first 3 books, if you read the first 3 novels, it's kind of like big, bigger, bigger. The books just keep getting, the scale just keeps getting larger and larger. And so with me writing the 4th one, I was looking and thinking, I can't top that. We can't keep going bigger and bigger. It's just going to be insane. We're going to get 5 or 6 books in and it'll be the end of the universe, right? We've got to try and change the tone. So with Eisenstein, it was deliberate choice on my part to say, instead of going bigger, I'm going to go smaller.
Yeah.
And this is going to be a story about one guy. And I changed the way the focus went. So you've got the big 3 opening books. That's kind of like, in a way, it's like the overture, the opening music that plays at the beginning of an opera that sets out the tone. So this is the kind of story you're going to get. And then Eisenstein kind of goes down into a sort of like a lull, and then we go back up and down. And once we established that we would have big stories and small stories, we were, free to kind of go and tell whatever kind of narrative we wanted in the Heresy. But for me, like I say, it was once I realized that this is one man's story, this is Nathaniel Garrow's story, I kind of had my kind of key into telling it, and was combining that with the sort of like the existing lore, and off I went.
Was he always aiming to be the hero that then had so much written about him that ends up, in the Knights Errant and Malcador and possibly the leader of the Grey Knights and all of this? Was that envisaged at that point, or does that all just...
Not at all, in fact. We talked about how we wanted to have some viewpoint characters. So Garviel Locum's the best example of that, right? He's a character who would be not one of the top tier characters, so not like a Primarch or not a first captain, somebody just like one level below that who would have agency in the story, so you could follow them through the heresy and you could see the events through their eyes, but they would be a character who wasn't necessarily wearing any plot armor, right? Kill them off if we needed to. And Garrow's kind of existing on that sort of level, even though he's like a named character from early lore. There was nothing that said, well, he doesn't get back to Earth and then, the Titan steps on him. There's nothing to say that we couldn't have changed that if we wanted to.
Yeah.
So I remember doing the Eisenstein, and then after I finished the book, I said to the other writers, well, it's almost like I put the piece on the board. That piece is Nathaniel Garrow, and I say, well, does anybody else want to pick this character up and do something with him? And nobody did, because everybody else was telling their own story and doing their own thing. This is back at the beginning in the kind of the white heat of the early years of the Horus Heresy, and we were all going off in different directions and doing cool stuff. Nobody picked up Garrow, not because he wasn't a cool character, but because everybody was doing something different. And I kept getting people say to me, are you going to go back and tell a Garrow story? Or what happened to him next? Where does he go from here? And I thought, well, I'm sure there's more I could do with him. And the idea was kind of ticking over in the back of my head. And at the same time, I'd been talking to Black Library about doing audio drama, because I love writing audio drama. I'm a big fan of it. I've written loads of it, and I love to listen to it. And I kept saying to them, this is a really great way to tell a story. And you're missing a trick here. We should do Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40k and Horus Heresy audio drama. It'd be a really cool idea. And so we'd done a couple of stories at that point. And the editorial team came to me and they said, look, we want to do Horus Heresy audio drama. And people want to see Garrow stories. And you did Garrow and you did audio. This is a no-brainer. Do a Garrow audio story. So he became, in a way, the kind of the torchbearer for Heresy audio drama for a while. And that just became, right, this is the logical place to start exploring this character. And gradually, we built his story up through the audios and then kind of folded him back into the book narrative as the series went on. And a lot of that was helped by the fact that I had some really great source material, some terrific artwork and design of the characters. So, that I had like paintings and artwork of the character I could look at that would help me kind of get into his head. And we also had a terrific voice actor, Toby Longworth, who now has done loads and loads of Warhammer stuff. And Toby's a great guy, and he's a bit of a nerd, and he gets it. That's the thing I really loved about working with him. I worked with him previously on Big Finish's Judge Dredd series, where he was playing Dredd, and again, he gets that stuff. And I can remember going into the audio recording booth with him, and I had the Horus Heresy. Remember when it was the 3 volumes, the big skinny volumes before they did the hardcover, and I had the one with the big picture of the John Gravato picture of Garrow kind of holding the sword and looking up nobly. And I gave him that, and I said, "This is the guy. This is who you are." And I remember he just kind of studied looking this picture of Garrow in the eye, and he said, "What's he like?" And we had this conversation about who Garrow was, what kind of officer he was. And as we were talking, Toby was trying out these different voices. And as I was explaining the kind of character Garrow was, he said, "Oh, he's kind of like, in a way, he's kind of like Lawrence of Arabia. He's this character he was an officer, but now he goes through this transformative experience. And so even though he's kind of like a sort of almost upper class type dude, he's also very connected to his men, and he's beloved by his own soldiers." And I said, "Yeah, there is a lot of Lawrence of Arabia in there." And he started doing like a riff on Peter O'Toole's voice from the movie.
Oh, wow.
And so if you listen, I love this, is if you go back and you listen to Garrow's voice, you can hear Toby doing this little kind of Peter O'Toole voice. And that's kind of like him, building that thread of Lawrence of Arabia into it. That's one of the things I loved about working on this, especially with Toby, is because his performance informed the way that I wrote the character going on past that point. So in a way, he's as much kind of a father of that character as I am, and the original writers on the original 40k epic stuff where the character was created, and John Gravato, who did the artwork. All of us have kind of created that character. So that was the kind of the genesis of Garrow moving into the audio stories. And then, as I said, people wanted to see where his story went, so we just kept on building on it. And I did the Vow of Faith novella, and then we did the bind up edition where we put all the stories together into a text version. And then he appears again in Buried Dagger. But his story, of course, is not over yet. There's still more to come.
Oh, that's very exciting. Is he going to turn out to be Secret Psyker? Is he going to suddenly explode with psychic power? Okay, that's good, because that would ruin it.
No, we're not doing that. I mean, people, I've been asked that question before. Is like, Garrow really, has he got psychic ability? And I never wanted to do that for him, because although that's a cool idea, to me, I think that would draw away from his humanity.
Completely
so I wanted
agree.
him to, he's just all right, he's a space marine, so he's obviously pretty awesome to begin with. But underneath all that, he's a regular guy. And I didn't want to give him any sort of special abilities beyond that.
You mentioned when you were talking there about there being these points that were known, these kind of flags in the sand, but you can expand on. In the areas where there's not that much background, how much kind of freedom do you get when you're writing for Black Library to come up with things? I mean, I don't know how much background there was on the Yorgal or the Nephilim or any of the kind of Xenos races that you write. Are you allowed a bit of kind of free reign there to kind of come up with your own ideas?
Well, I think the Yorgal they are actually mentioned in the lore somewhere, but there wasn't a lot of background about them.
Yeah.
The Nephilim were like complete, they were something completely new that I invented. But yeah, it was the parts of the heresy where we didn't have lore, or if we had like really, really sketchy kind of stuff, we got a free hand. And there's kind of there's like the 3 ages, or maybe like the 4 ages of the heresy novels, really, looking back at it now, right? You've got like the kind of the opening era of the novels where everybody exploded out in different directions, and we were just going crazy with it. And we were telling wacky, interesting stories, and we were going off in directions that weren't expected. And then there's the kind of the middle movement where everything starts to come together, and we figure out what the series is about, and the writers start kind of building their own continuity, and it starts coming together. And then you've got the kind of the 3rd age, which is, well, now we need to wrap this up, and where everything starts to come together and starts to conclude. And then the kind of final age is the Siege of Terror, and that's the end cap. That's the end of the entire series. When we were in that kind of 3rd area, the kind of pre-siege bit, to be honest, I think we could have just kept on going and going. And I think it was in the end, it was a definite decision by GW, to say, like, you know what, we can't keep doing this forever. We are going to have to eventually wrap this up. So rather than do like 200 novels and people go, oh, it's still going on, and have us kind of just scraping the bottom of the barrel, we were like, we've gone through 50 odd books. Let's end this now before we outstay our welcome.
Yeah,
that was the kind of decision that was made. And because of that, there were choices that were made that, you know, we were like, oh, well, we wanted to do a book about this, but now we're not going to be able to do that book. So that, you know, some stuff kind of got left by the wayside. But hopefully when everything is finished, when the final Siege of Terror book comes out, we'll go from it being an ongoing series to being a setting in the same way that like 40K or Age of Sigmar is. And we could possibly go back and tell other heresy stories and say, well, now we'll tell a story from the early years of the heresy, or we'll tell a story from the middle years of the heresy that will fit in amongst those novels, but it won't be part of an ongoing serial like the books are right now.
Yeah. The Horus Heresy, the book series, is almost like a living story, and it's funny how, as it's gone on for so long now, there's important details from books that have been out for many years, and they almost become more important as the story develops towards the siege. And I was wondering how has that been managed over time with all the authors?
Well, you know, I would like to lie to you and tell you that there was a massive document and we had a big conspiracy wall chart with all the threads and everything, and that we all had it planned out from the beginning, but that would not be true, not even slightly. I mean, it was. You say it being a living story. It was a living, breathing, evolving sort of thing. Like I said, we had the points in the lore where we knew stuff was going to happen, but we also had huge areas of doubt and uncertainty where, you know, there's that kind of middle section of the heresy where if you look at the lore, there's nothing about it. It's like, well, what was happening in the middle of the heresy? You know, we know about the Istvan, and you know about the betrayal, and you know about like Cal, and you know about Prospero, and then there's a big gap, and then it's kind of like, and then the Siege of Terror happened, and there's all this other stuff. You know, I mean, we've filled a lot of that stuff in now, but you have to cast your mind back to before the heresy books came out. None of that stuff existed, you know, and there weren't any rule books or anything like that. I mean, I remember at the early stages, there was actually a sort of like definitive rules, and we're not going to do a Horus Heresy game. There's not going to be rules for it. It's just going to be in the books. But demand was so high from people. So many people wanted to play 30K that, you know, Forge World said, this is just ridiculous. We're not doing it. And so we got the, you know, those huge, massive, the big Horus Heresy books. And those have expanded out the lore as well, you know, and fed back into the novels and vice versa.
Yeah. You mentioned that you were there at the start, and you know, when you first started writing, you were kind of going off in different directions. It was just this kind of big, sort of quite chaotic story. Was there anything sort of shared influences that you had? Like, was there any point where you sort of sat down and put a big board up and said, right, these are the kind of influences that we're going to use, or anything like that? Or was it really just, let's just go for it and see what happens kind of thing?
We had a really good collaborative sense though, and it got a bit more diffuse as time went on. But in the early years of the heresy, we would have these regular meetings, and it would be a group of us in a room, you know, and we would, as I would say, you know, we would have coffee and biscuits, and we would toy with the fate of a billion worlds, you know, and it was just such fun to sit in a room with creative people, with great writers, and with this access to this great toy box of story, and say, how are we going to tell them? What ideas have we got? You know, what stories can we tell? We know we want to tell this bit of lore, but we have this character, and we have, you know, this possibility, and it just, you know, it's been one of the best experiences of my writing career, I have to say, just to be in that room and collaborate on ideas, because there wasn't any sort of preciousness back in the early days. There was definitely a sense that if one of us came up with a great idea, it might not necessarily be the book that you wrote. But it was a very free exchange. So it was like, well, I've got this great idea, but I don't want to write it, but it might fit better in your novel, and then the other author would take it. And so we all felt like we had a collaboration going on. So certainly, as I say, in the early books, there was a sense that every writer's fingerprints were kind of on everybody else's books, because we would always kind of workshop it and talk about how we could create the best story that would work for the franchise. And nobody was bigger than the story, you know. None of us were kind of like, oh well, you know, this person's going to tell this story and this person's going to tell that story, and never the twain shall meet. It was like, no, what's the thing that works best for the novel series, and we'll do that. And so we worked as a team, and I really enjoyed being part of that, and just creating you know, great ideas, and stuff would just emerge out of the kind of the mass of it. You know, we'd get into a room and we'd be talking about ideas, and by the end of it, it'd be like, you know what, someone's going to have to do a novel of that. And you hadn't even thought of that when you walked into the room. You know, just designing these things and gradually stringing together this kind of line of pearls along the thread that are going to be the entire Horus Heresy. It was a really exciting, thrilling sort of thing to be part of.
And did in Games Workshop, they were sort of like, they gave you free reign. They said, just fill in these blanks, do whatever you want, go crazy, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was like yes and no. I mean, because we all knew the franchise really well, it was important that, you know, nobody was working on the series who didn't know the franchise, who didn't know the texture and tone of the IP. So nobody would come up with an idea that was totally out there, because we knew what sort of stories we were supposed to tell. And we also had, like, you know, people like Alan Merritt who would come into the meetings and give us his point of view of things. And we had the editorial team at BL, and any time we needed information or lore, or if we needed somebody on tap that we could talk to, you know, about particular bits of backstory, that resource was always there. So, you know, we stayed inside the lines because we knew where the lines were, but we could also push at the edges of the boundaries. So if we came up with a crazy idea and said, well, what if we did something really crazy like this? There was always, it was never, the answer was never no. It was always kind of like, well, let's talk about how we could make that work. And that freedom was really rewarding.
Was Nemesis an example of that? Because that was the first kind of book I remember in the series that strayed away from straight Space Marine fights and looked at some of the more kind of off-kilter areas of the lore. Was that you kind of asking for some freedom?
It was well, you know, I said earlier about how kind of ideas would come out of nowhere. This is one of those. I was in a meeting with Dan Abnett and Graham McNeil, and they were discussing Thousand Suns and Prospero Burns, because those books are kind of a duology, you know, because they connect so strongly together. And originally, I don't know if you know this, Dan was going to write Graham's book and Graham was going to write Dan's book.
No.
And it was only kind of like later in the iteration process that they swapped, and they changed over who was going to write what. And I think they even changed the order of the books being published as well. It's a while back now. But I was in that meeting where we were discussing the whole sort of Prospero sort of situation and how the stories were going to play out, and how each book was going to be from a different Legion's point of view. And after a while, I was kind of thinking, I'm not really sure why I'm here, because I'm not going to write one of these books. What's my purpose in the room? And they said, well, we just want someone else here to just, who isn't connected to this, to just kind of throw in an outside viewpoint. So I was kind of like, you know, in a way, sort of like a moderator, sort of like, and what about if you did this? What about if you did that? And in the course of us having this discussion, one of us, I think it was Graham, we started talking about assassins. And we started talking about what would the assassins be doing during, and the light bulb just went on in my head, and I was like, here's a great idea for a novel, an assassin's novel. What's going on with the Assassinorum during the heresy? And I jotted down a few notes. And by the end of the meeting, although I'd walked in the room not intending to come up with a novel, by the time I got to the end of it, I had an idea for a book.
Wow.
And it just came out of that sort of that shared flux of ideas. And I remember at the end of the meeting, as we were packing our stuff away, Graham came over and he prodded me in the shoulder and he said, that assassin book, you're going to write it? And I said, oh, no, I'm not sure. And he said, well, if you don't, I will, because it's a really cool idea. And I thought, yeah, you know, and it kind of motivated me to do it. So I went away and I took the ideas, the rough ideas that we had, and I kind of knocked them into shape and I pitched it. And I said, how about this? And they said, yeah, go for it. And so away we went. But, you know, if I hadn't been at that meeting, if I hadn't been in that room, maybe that book would not exist.
And it's such cool, like, I've listened to most of the Horus Heresy now, and it's great when you get a little break that's on something that isn't Space Marine. And it's a completely different viewpoint of the Imperium. And that's what makes a lot of the books so good, is the books that have both the epic Space Marine space battles and the boots on the ground character. So to have whole books of that as well, really variation. Yeah.
I mean, I think it was like Legion is the first book that kind of strays away from all Space Marines all the time in Heresy. And like Nemesis as well, it's kind of a Marmite book. Some people say, oh, well, you don't need to read this if you're going to the Heresy. And it's like, well, yeah, I guess you don't, but it's if you want the whole story, read all of the books. Nemesis is about what it's like to be a regular person living with the shadow of the Horus Heresy. So we had this idea in the room. We would talk about Joe Hive City, this idea of the regular guy living in his Hive City, going about his life while the Horus Heresy is happening. What would it be like to be that guy? Somebody just like us, not a Space Marine, not somebody involved in the imperial court on some sort of high level, just a regular, ordinary person going down to the shop to get a pint of Brock's milk, right? And look after his family. What's it like being that person? And part of that was like, I wanted to do that in Nemesis and say, well, let's just talk about what it would be like to live on a planet. And you're hearing on the news that, Horus has taken over this planet a couple of star systems away and they could be coming here. What's it like to be that person? And it was interesting to just explore that, to just say, let's just take the focus away from Space Marines for a little, because we know we're going to go back and tell way more stories about them further on, and just, have one novel where there's hardly any of them even sort of appear in the plot line.
When we, you talked earlier about how 30K was never going to be a game. We talked to Gav Thorpe a while ago, and he was saying how there was never intentions for Primarchs or necessarily things from 30K to ever come back into the 40K game setting. So as that as a kind of start point, what are the differences you find between writing 30K and 40K, and what should and shouldn't be within those brackets?
Well, I would never say, something shouldn't be there. I mean, I think if you've got a great reason to bring a character back, like to kind of bring a piece of lore from one era into another, and it works well, then do it. I think if it's a good story, absolutely shouldn't be able to say like these two things are totally separate, never the twain shall meet, because they are part of the same continuity, albeit 10,000 years apart. But the core difference is the heresy is a tragedy, and the tragedy is happening right in front of you. Whereas in 40K, the tragedy has already happened, and you're in the kind of you're in the sort of like terrible aftermath of this, and you can't get out of the tragedy. You're mired in it, But what you're seeing in the 30K books is you get this glimpse, especially in the early novels, of this bright shining future, which is all lost in this terrible sort of mythological Greek tragedy in all senses of the word. Is where the characters are just within reaching distance of this great future, and it all falls apart. And I think that's at the core of what 30K is. It's about betrayal. It's about fathers and sons. It's about all of these sort of issues about who you trust and who you don't trust, what it means to be human, what it means to lead, all of that great sort of crunchy kind of narrative ideas. Whereas 40K is about a world enmeshed in the terrible aftermath of the 30K universe, where everything has gone terribly wrong. And the characters in it are just trying to live through this horrible world that they're in, trying to hold on to their sort of like their nobility, trying to sort of survive to the best of their ability.
I wondered, Jim, you mentioned Crimson Knight, and it was probably a question that should have been asked a little earlier, but when you were starting the short stories for Inferno in the early 2000s, was the chapter given to you, or did you pick them, or was it set out for you? Or
yeah, there was this idea when Inferno was kind of at the height of its power, that the editorial team wanted to have a Space Marine Legion that would never appear in any sort of Index Astartes article or lore book, but they would be like the faction, the designated faction for fiction, and that was going to be the Doom Eagle. So we were going to, they're an Ultramarine successor chapter, and there was some sort of paperwork and details put together and said the Doom Eagles are going to be this recurring chapter that we would see reappearing again and again in Inferno in different stories.
Right.
And that was kind of the idea that was laid out. So they said, we want you to do a Doom Eagle story. And there are a few Doom Eagle stories out there, but the idea sort of just kind of dissipated, and in the end we just didn't bother. But that was, they said to me, take the Doom Eagles, do a story about them. And then once I was really champing at the bit to do some Blood Angel stuff as well. And so I thought, well, I can't fit the Blood Angels into this, but it really dovetailed well with the plot line, putting in the Flesh Tearers in, who are kind of, the black sheep of the Blood Angels family. So once I had that idea, I connected them together. And the squad that I created for Crimson Knight, I did another story for them called Relics, which was that was like my second. That was like the second story I did for Inferno, and I also brought back some of those characters later on into my later Blood Angels novels, just to sort of reconnect the story. And I did and I did a little sort of short story with one of them as well. Just so there's like 3 or 4 stories out there with my own kind of private Doom Eagle continuity, these stories that we connect up. So that was a lot of fun to write them, because they're an interesting legion. You know, they have this sort of morose kind of almost sort of death loving sort of attitude towards them, but there's kind of a lot more depth to them than that. I think they have this way, they venerate relics, and they have this whole thing about visiting pilgrimages to sites of terrible battles where things went horribly wrong. And I like the sort of the gloomy sort of nature of them. I think it's an interesting duality to sort of play with.
You mentioned Blood Angels there. We haven't really talked about the chapters you write on the whole. We talked about Garrow, who's not really a Death Guard. I mean, the big chapters you've written are Blood Angels and Death Guard, and they couldn't be more kind of opposed in my mind. Was that a conscious choice to pick 2 very different legions?
I mean, the Blood Angel stuff came from, so like I said, the first thing I did was I did a couple of Doom Eagle stories, and I did an Imperial Guard story. These are the short stories. Those were like my audition pieces. And then Lindsay Priestley was the editor at the time. She said, well, look, you know, we like your writing. We want you to do novels. We're going to commission you to write 2 books. What would you like to do? And she said, you can either pick a piece of the lore that nobody's done, or you can come up with something yourself. And I did toy with the idea very early on of creating my own successor chapter, kind of following in the footsteps of what Ben Counter had done with the Soul Drinkers. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I had a few ideas. I kicked them around, and I was looking actually at developing a legion that had a kind of samurai kind of feel to it, because I really like kind of Japanese history and that kind of particular warring states here and that sort of stuff. And I thought about it would be fun to take that, like the way the Ultramarines kind of have a lot of Roman imagery in their background and lore. I thought it would be interesting to sort of tackle sort of like the Japanese samurai sort of thing. But I realized that was going to be a lot of work to pitch a novel, to build all of that. And I thought, why am I doing this when there's a perfectly good chapter right in front of me that no one had did a novel about, which was the Blood Angels, who were my favorite sort of chapter from the existing lore. At that point, the only Blood Angel stuff that had been done is the Blood Quest comics. There were no novels, nothing like that out there. So I pitched 2 ideas, and one of them was a kind of sort of Black Hawk Down type story about a small squad of Blood Angels stuck on a planet as chaos is taking over, and they have to sort of get away. And it's like basically the entire planet chasing one squad of Blood Angels. And I thought, that's the story they're going to go for. So I thought, I'll pitch a small story, and then I'll just pitch the mad, crazy, blow the doors off idea, which they will never buy. And that's the story they said, we want to do that one, which was the what if Sanguinius came back, the kind of second coming story, the idea of a civil war within the Blood Angels chapter. And they were like, no, we like that because it's big and it's crazy and it's wild. And that's what 40K does. 40K is all about turning the dial up to 11 and breaking the dial off, right? And that's what they wanted. So I said, okay. So I kind of jumped in with both feet. And that was the Deus Sanguinius, Deus in Carmine duology. Yeah. And then off the back of that, they asked me to come back and write more. And so I did Black Tide and Red Fury following on with the same characters and a couple other sort of short stories in between. So that was why, so that's my Blood Angels kind of like origin story. I got to do the Cygnus Prime story as well, I guess through, because that was the Blood Angel story I always wanted to tell in the Horus Heresy. Yeah. So I kind of planted my flag in that one and said, I really want to do this. And so that's how I got to write that. But doing the Death Guard, that kind of bloomed out of writing Garrow, because once I did Garrow, I had to write about the Death Guard to write about Garrow. So once I became sort of, connected to that character, I realized that they're a really interesting legion as well. And like you say, they are the absolute complete opposite to what the Blood Angels are. And that's part of the appeal of writing them, is because they are so totally different. I think if I was writing about a legion that was too similar to the Blood Angels, it wouldn't be interesting.
Well, refry my beans, Large Blast podcast fan, if this isn't some tip-top chit-chat. And we'll be right back with it after a little bit of Random Topic Generator.
Okay, welcome back to this part of the show, ladies and gentlemen, the part we like to call the Random Topic Generator, where we generate a topic at random using our chart and the company dice. So, Welshie, do you have the company dice to hand?
Of course. Here they are.
Okay, roll the company dice.
It's a 4. What piece of terrain, if you could invent it, would you introduce to a 40k board?
Oh, that's a good one. I think there's lots of cool factions that don't have like a decent piece of terrain. I think demons have got really missing a trick on making some really cool demon terrain. I'd love to see some like crazy like hills of Slanesh covered in tits, or like some big like Gunge pond for Nurgle, or like a pool of blood even for Khorne with a big throne in the middle or something cool like that. That'd be
I'm glad you said hill of tits, because I was going to go straight like some kind of torture chamber with just a load of dildos on the wall. You know, like how in James Bond they always go to the gun shop and all the guns are like on the wall, like laid out, but like that, but with just loads of sex toys.
Oh, that'd be quite cool. You could put one down by the side, and then it's got like a chalk line drawn around it, like in a tool wall. You know. Yeah. Yeah. So I think there'd be demon stuff would be fucking awesome. I think also there'd be some really cool admech terrain that you could make, like a sort of a built, like a factory or something where you've got something half built in the middle with all these cranes and shit working on it. I think the terrain could be a lot more creative from Games Workshop. Obviously we mentioned a little bit about Tyrannid stuff on our Tyrannid Park episode, but a really cool bio pool or something.
That's what I'd like to see. I'd love a board. Can you imagine a board that had like actual liquid? So there was the kind of feeder ship on the top of to the corner of the board, and loads of tubes coming out of the board with actual like liquid being pumped round and back under the board. That's extreme, but even just like digestion pools with like big straws and suckers and stuff coming out of them, I think would be. There just isn't Tyrannid terrain. It just doesn't exist. There's those few things that look like those seed pods with holes in from Forge World, but it's so well described in the lore.
I mean, we've kind of mentioned in the past a little bit about how places like Forge World used to do like packs that came with stuff that you could attach to things to kind of make terrain out of, like windows or whatever. And then it would be quite cool if like those containers that you get, like the scenery container things, if you could get like maybe like a Tyrannid pack where you could like put on like little bits of like gunge and goo and like maybe some eggs hiding inside of it or something, like some kind of weird Tyrannid cult was hiding away in one of these containers or something like that. So but I think it's getting boring, all this just like grey building, these kind of Soviet blocks. We got excited about a radar dish earlier in this fucking episode. Like, there's so many cool things there could be. Some cool towel scenery, a big cool towel house, like with a big rounded top or something, that we, anything.
What about, like, the thing that's always confuses me about the trade is it's always just like buildings and hab blocks. But then the lore is so full of others. Can you imagine a big piece of terrain that was actually a proper 40k crushed Space Hulk? Imagine you could get a big chunk of like crushed Space Hulk. Like when you go to Warhammer World, if any of you guys listening have ever played on the Warhammer World tables, they've kind of got that big smashed up Titans in the middle. Like it doesn't have to be resin, but can you imagine a broken Titan plastic terrain kit? That would be excellent.
Or like the head, just like the head or some body bit.
But I used to buy the actual Titan for in order to get a wrecked Titan,
I used to fantasize about winning the lottery, as we all do. But I used to fantasize about winning the lottery and having like a barn that was a huge Warhammer, like a section of an actual city, right? That I'd build, and in my head. And this is before I played on the Warhammer table in Warhammer World. In my head, I'd have a Warlord Titan. I don't know, they didn't exist at the time, but I don't, build like an Imperator maybe, and have like a massive skyscraper at the end of this huge boulevard. And the Titan would have like been shot to pieces and would have fallen into the building. So there'd be like a Titan outline in this like glass building, and the Titan would kind of be stuck in the building, like dribbling.
I know exactly.
It's like boom. Fucking wicked. Obviously, you couldn't buy that from Games Workshop. The admech terrain, definitely. But if I was Games Workshop, I think my answer to this question is that they should do not technically a terrain piece, but maybe there's a way you could tie it in with your games. But scenic bases like Forge World do for the Primarchs, where you have holes for bases, and like is their whole, it's like a section of building at a weird angle, or a section of spaceship that's all like jaggedy, and you've got holes to put your like commander in, so you can turn your HQ model into a diorama when you put them in, and you can like adapt the base of your
I see what you're saying, just ones that you could buy for anyone, so it's like 32 mil display base basically that you can buy on the shelf.
Big terrain blob.
We want to talk a little bit, James, about some of your kind of work outside of Black Library as well, and what the difference is between writing these big expansive novels and some more maybe your screenwriting. And I know you've recently done the Guardians of the Galaxy computer game, and kind of what the different challenges are just more in general as a writer writing in these different formats, and whether you'd ever take on the challenge of a Warhammer 40k based TV show should it become more and more likely. What are the major challenges moving in and out of these different formats?
It's, well, you know, I always say it's all writing at the end of the day, right? It's all it's all story. But it's like having different tools in your toolkit. You know, if you're using a spanner for writing novels, you're using a screwdriver for writing video games, right? But it's still tools, right? You're still drawing from the same place, the same sort of ability to kind of, can you create a good narrative? Can you create compelling characters? Can you have good dialogue and plot and pace? You know, all of that has to be translated to either the page or the screen. But once you get past that, when you get into the execution of it, that's the difficult part. When you're writing a novel, it's just you and the screen and the editor at the other end, right? And you've got a lot of control over the way the world looks, the way the characters speak, the way everything kind of gets put together. But if you're working on something that's being put in the screen, so if you're writing for like TV or radio, or if you're writing for a video game, you're just one person working in a big team of people. And that's good and bad. I mean, in some ways, sometimes, you know, ideas you might have will get diluted and someone else will change it and put it in a different direction. You have to kind of accept it because that's part of being in a team. But also, it's cool because you get to work with talented, cool, clever people. And sometimes they'll come up to you and they'll say, well, you know that thing you did, I'm going to add this idea to it. And suddenly your idea is twice as good. And it's like, you know, that kind of amazing creative energy, that's so much fun to be part of that. Working with the team on Guardians of the Galaxy, that's Eidos Montreal. It's a studio over in Canada. I'd worked with them previously on the Deus Ex series of video games, Deus Ex Human Revolution and Deus Ex Mankind Divided. And they asked, I didn't do actually a lot of work on Guardians of the Galaxy, just sort of a few of the cutscenes. But because I've worked with them in the past, they said to me, would you like to come in and just do a little bit of coverage for us on this? And I was like, I'd love to, because I'm a huge Marvel Comics nerd from way back when. And the opportunity to get my hands on the Guardians, who are really fun characters to write. I had an absolute blast doing that. I really did. It was a shame when I finished it. I was like, oh, if you've got any more work, I want to do more. You know, please call me back and bring me back. And I had such a great time writing it, because it's such a different tone from the stuff I was writing. You know, because it's very fast and loose. It's very sarcastic, and there's a lot of humor in there. And it was just, you know, it was one of those jobs where I couldn't wait to get my hands on it in the morning. It was really a lot of fun. And it's a great game too. It really plays really well. And, you know, I think it's one of those sort of projects where everything hit the note exactly right. And the end product is something I'm really proud to have been part of.
You've obviously worked on some of these really, you know, some franchises that people hold in really high regard, like Deus Ex and Warhammer and Star Trek and all this kind of stuff. And obviously you're a fan, but is it also quite daunting, you know, because obviously people, you know, fandom can be quite extreme, can't it? People can get quite upset with you for making choices.
I have no idea
like
what but yeah. I mean, yeah, I am definitely a fan of the stuff I write for. I think, to be honest, I don't think you can write for an existing franchise without being somewhat of a fan of it, because I think people who are fans will know if you don't care about the world and the characters you're writing about, people can smell that a mile off. You know, if you're just phoning it in. I've read stuff, I've played games that are based on things that I love, and I think, yeah, you don't really care for this. You're not really putting your energy into it. I don't ever want to be that guy. You know, I would never work on a franchise that I wasn't interested in. I mean, I've had that happen in the past. You know, people have offered me projects And I'm like, I don't care about that character. I don't care about that world. I wouldn't do a great job. Give it to somebody who loves it, who will give you what you need, because I'm not the right guy. I want to work on things that I love, franchises that I care about. And I've been lucky enough to do that. So I understand the kind of weight of expectation. And it is difficult because, when we were working on Deus Ex, this is a really good example. One of the developers of the original game came to see us, Sheldon Pecotti, his name was. And we were getting a lot of negative commentary online. This is before the game even came out. People were saying, oh, well, Deus Ex is regarded as one of this benchmark of a game. And, who's this studio who are these people? Are they going to make a good game out of it? And we brought Sheldon in and we showed him what we were doing, and he was very impressed. And I remember as he was getting on the plane to leave, he said, good luck, guys. Don't fuck it up. and
good
and
advice.
we were like, no, right? We don't want to be the guys who make a mess of it. And that pressure is always there, is that there is always a sense that someone's looking over your shoulder. And you want to do something that the fans will enjoy. But the truth is there's always going to be people you won't make happy. Because the one thing about any kind of fandom is fans have their own idea of what that world is, of how that story should be told, of how these characters should behave and what have you. And you are never going to be able to 100% match that to what's in their head. You can do as close as you possibly can, but there's always going to be somebody who's like, well, I didn't quite like the way you did that. And you have to accept that going in, because it's got such your fan bases are so huge. Everybody has a different perception of it. You have to accept that you're always going to kind of be slightly off kilter for some people, and just try and aim for the best story and the best tone that you possibly can get. But I like doing it. I like working in franchise IPs. I like working in universes that have kind of personally given me a lot of enjoyment, because I feel like I'm kind of paying back a little bit. Star Trek's a great example. It's something I've been a Star Trek fan my entire life. I used to watch it when I was a kid coming home from school. And it's kind of like, in a way, it's like that was like my first fandom, the first thing that I ever really consumed a lot of when I read the books and the comics, and I watched the TV shows and the movies. And being able to write a story in that world, for me, feels like I'm giving something back to a world that gave me a lot of pleasure. And it's the same with 40K as well. These are all things that I've loved, and hopefully now I can say, well, I made a little piece of that. I helped to move that world on a little bit. And that's really fun to be able to say I've done that.
It must be very rewarding to go from being, such a long Star Trek fan to watching an episode and be like, I wrote that line, I did that bit, and that must be a really amazing experience.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Do you have any advice for people that might be out there? I know we've got some listeners that are interested in writing and things. Do you have any advice for people trying to get going on this kind of stuff nowadays?
Oh yeah, I mean, I often hear from people who say like, I'd like to write for 40K. I'd like to write for Black Library or for for the Star Trek books or that kind of thing. And I always say that that it's a difficult road to walk, because it's very rare that you will get offered the opportunity to write for a franchise without having some example of your work already. I think Warhammer is probably one of the few that has like an open call. They regularly will have a competition where you can go in and pitch story ideas. But that is very, very rare. Most people don't appreciate how rare that really is. Because a lot of these franchises will be like, you're not going to come in here and do stuff for us. I mean, let's say you're a big fan of Batman. You're not going to walk into DC Comics and go, so I've got this great idea for a Batman story. And they're going to be, yeah, sure, come on in, write a Batman.
Lord knows I've tried. They're not having it.
If you wanted to write a Batman story, you would have to sit down and prove that you could write comics, that you could understand stuff. And then maybe if you're lucky, someone at DC might call you up and go, you want to try out for Batman? But you're not going to be able to walk in the door. And it's the same with a lot of other franchises. There's only a few that will voluntarily let people try out, and Warhammer is one of them. But I always say to people, the most important thing to do is find your own voice first. Write your own thing. Write something, even if you're a big fan of the franchise and say, I want to write Warhammer. Write a thing that's not Warhammer. Find your voice. Find something that expresses your ability as a writer. Because you can always take that to anywhere in the world and sell it. But if you have a Warhammer idea and the people at Black Library don't want to buy it, you can't sell it anywhere else. You can't make a career out of it. But if you have an idea that has no basis in a franchise, you can take it wherever you want. And then you have a calling card. And you can take that to an IP and say, well, look, here's a story I wrote. Shows that I can write, shows I understand characters and nuance and plot. Maybe I could bring that skill to your universe. And that's much more likely to get your foot in the door than kind of concentrating on writing one particular kind of intellectual property.
To bring it back round to the second half of my overly long question, would you be interested in writing live action 40K? Can it even be done?
Well, it's I mean, there have been some discussions. I mean, when the Eisenstein, no, Eisenhorn.
I do that all the time.
Eisenhorn show was in development. I talked to my agent and I said, look, if they're looking for writers, I'm kind of familiar with that universe, so I could probably do it. We had some discussions about it, but didn't kind of go any further than that. But yeah, I mean, I would love to do that. I think it would be interesting to write in that universe. How hard it would be to present it well, that's a different question. I mean, it's
I'd love to see it.
I mean, I'd love to see somebody try it, right? But then it'd be very easy to screw it up. It'd be very easy to kind of, for the reach to exceed its grasp. I mean, if you were doing, let's say, people say like, oh, let's do an Imperial Guard story, do Gaunt's Ghosts or something like that, right? Or like The Last Chances. That kind of thing, that's not a million miles away from stuff you've probably already seen on TV, and it would probably be cheaper and easier to do that. But then if you want to do a Space Marine story, and you want to do something about like mass legions of Space Marine kicking Xenos ass, you're going to blow your budget at the first episode just by showing a bunch of guys with power armor, right? It's like, how do you do that? How would you present like a Space Marine on TV without making a lot of choices that would make it further and further away from the show? We look at the way that Space Marines look compared to like regular humans and big towering transhuman guys, right? How are you going to show that on screen? Are you just going to say,
that's true.
It's going to be just a regular guy in power armor? It's like, okay, you've already made a compromise there, and you have to make another compromise and another and another and another. How would you do that? You could do a rogue trader crew type story. That's like in the mold of kind of Blake Seven, Firefly. Those kind of stories about a crew of people getting into trouble. I did the same sort of thing with my Corsair audio drama series. That's something that you could do with a 40K feel to it. But how you would tell a story that would truly have the, everything about the Warhammer universe that is cool, how you would translate that to the screen without having a massive budget, I don't know. That would be a very hard thing to do.
Yeah, that's true.
I think that's why the animations are so promising. I don't know if you've seen much of the Warhammer Plus stuff, but like the Angels of Death series kind of it allows you to represent those worlds with a little bit more realism than trying to do it with real people.
Yeah, animation, I mean, is probably the best venue for this kind of universe because there's so much going on in the Warhammer universe, because it's so visually rich, visually expensive, right? I've just been watching the Book of Boba Fett this week. Yeah. And the Star Wars universe, again, is a very visually striking universe. But and you've got loads of weird, interesting aliens and machines and ships and stuff going on there. And I look at that and I go, yeah, but to do Warhammer, you have to do that, but with the dial turned up to 10. Yeah. Because the universe is so packed full of detail. You look at the artwork that's associated with Warhammer 40,000 and Horus Heresy, and there's just so much going on. And to translate that visually onto a screen where everything's moving, wow, that would be, it would be a hard road.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying.
Love to see someone try.
Like Tatooine is nice and open and sunny and empty and one story, but a 700 story hive city with billions of people living in it is a different beast.
The only thing I'm remembering what you said at the beginning of the conversation, James, when you said back in the day, the fact that you were writing the Horus Heresy seemed to be. I remember when the first book came out, and I couldn't believe that Games Workshop were going to go down that route and write the Horus Heresy. It was massive. It's one of the biggest things in the lore, and it's been pulled off so well. So never say never. This stuff in 10 years' time, who knows?
It's funny, going back to those old days, when I was thinking back to it, I remember there were people who were complaining and they thought it was a terrible idea. That like, oh, this is the worst possible thing they could do, and it's going to be finished in 3 books. And it's like, 3 books, really? Okay. That was a question we used to get a lot. Is people would say like, how many books are there going to be? It's like, how many you can do, I think we could have gone on. I mean, in the end, Buried Dagger is like, well, it's the last Horus Heresy book, but not the last, because we've got the sequel. And that was number 54.
Wow.
I think.
Yes.
And that's pretty epic. I mean, I think there's only in the history of like science fiction and fantasy publishing, there's only a few other series that have gone on longer than that.
It's incredible, really.
I like the idea you suggested it becoming a setting for future novel, which of course it is, and it will become, and that's quite exciting to know. It's not really the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just too many cool stories out there in that world that we haven't told. And then past the point of the heresy, you know, there are other things like the Scouring, the Second Founding, and all these other sort of bits and pieces.
Yeah.
You know, the Age of Apostasy, all of this. There's lots of other big chunks of lore that could have the Horus Heresy treatment, you know, if BL choose to do so.
One thing I wanted to ask quickly, just whilst, because obviously, like you say, you were there from the beginning of it and everything. How did anybody ever, because we've talked on the show a little bit about how maybe mysticism was a influence on some of the lore, and I just wondered, is there any truth in that? Were Dan Abnett and were you all sitting around maybe talking about witchcraft and things like that potentially?
Well, who's been talking? What do you know? I think, you know, the truth is that the influences on the heresy just came from everywhere. I think, you know, we're all kind of voracious readers. A lot of us are interested in mythology and sort of weird occult stuff and military history. I know that, you know, a lot of the time we talked about parallels between not just kind of modern warfare, but also kind of like, you know, ancient mythological stories and also kind of like ancient history. And a lot of that we were kind of touching back on in the structure of the books and the sort of epic nature of it. Because the thing about the heresy is it is a myth. It is this epic myth. And we wanted to give it the same sort of dimension, bigger than big, epicer than epic kind of feel to it, you know, in the same way as like stories about kind of Athena and Hercules and stuff like that, you know, the true mythology that we as regular human beings live. We wanted to tell that stories of that mythological scope in this fictional world, but to have it feel epic, you know, feel mythological and larger than life. And that's the thing about the Warhammer universe is it's not a quiet world. It's like everything is big and loud and brassy and in your face, you know, and the dial is always turned up. As I always say, that nobody in Warhammer speaks, everybody declares, you know, that it's all, you know, everyone walks tall, everything has this operatic Shakespearean sort of gravitas to it. But it's never played for laughs. You know, it's everybody in it is very serious about what they're doing because this is a very serious universe that they're in. As fans, we can kind of take it a little bit less seriously, and there is this one of the sort of pillars that supports the Warhammer universe is this kind of dark, sarcastic British humor, and I think that's there in the DNA of the series, and you could never do it without that.
Well, this is segued quite well into a segment we like to do when we have authors on. We quite like to do a thing where we think of some lore on the fly. So what we're going to do is, Welshie's going to enter. We've got some names of the start of a chapter and the end of a chapter, and Welshie's going to randomly generate a chapter of Space Marines, and then we're just going to pull some lore out our arse about it with the help of a genuine Black Library author.
Let's go for it.
Welshie.
Okay. Yeah, we noticed.
Start up the Large Blast podcast computer and let's see how we're doing.
Okay, we're just typing in the trends, the kind of adjective followed by thing at the end. So I'm just going to pull out the first word. So we are getting the dandy felines. So the chapter is the dandy felines.
Oh no,
James, if you could run with that, Primarch,
All right,
Homeworld style. See what you've got.
Obviously, dandy felines. They've got to be an Emperor's Children successor chapter, name like that, right?
Okay.
There's no way they could be anything else. So what I'm seeing kind of like, you know, Mark IV Maximus armor with little cat ears on top, maybe.
Excellent.
You know,
amazing.
so
Yeah,
like, they've got like, you know, polka dot sort of uniforms, maybe, I don't know. Yeah, we could lead into that, couldn't we? It could definitely be. So obviously they've got to have their whole thing's got to be cat-like, right? So. So they would be. So their speciality would be kind of stealth and knocking things off tables, obviously.
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
So they would be like maybe like the space. They would be desperate enemies of the Space Wolves, right? They would not get on.
Oh yes,
yeah.
That's good.
They're gonna have they'd have like they're sort of like their biological thing was they would have fangs. They'd have cat fangs and the sort of slit pupil eyes. So we'd have their speciality would be stealth, maybe night ops, that kind of thing.
Yeah, looking dandy.
They'd have to cover their eyes up though to hide the reflections, otherwise they'd be spotted in the night.
And obviously they would all be gorgeous, slinky and gorgeous. They would all be like. So I'm imagining sort of thin, good-looking, not sort of beefy type Space Marines, but more in the Emperor's Children, Blood Angels level of stuff. Long hair, but lustrous, good-looking hair. Really nice beards, really well-groomed beards. That sort of stuff where it looks like they spent sort of like 20 hours in this.
Yeah, that's their prep.
Yeah. What about if their stealth is always undermined by the amount of cologne they have on? So you might not see them, but you can always smell them in the room.
Also, their weakness is anybody with a las cannon, right? Just pointing a little red dot in front of them.
Oh yeah,
chasing it up walls.
Yeah.
So they've got like no laser weapons, right? They wouldn't be into laser weapons. But,
what about water pistols? The downfall is that they need to go and subdue some kind of water-based planet, but they won't go anywhere near the enemy.
Yeah,
and obviously a legion like that would never do what you told them. So they would always be constantly in trouble with the Inquisition because they would turn up late for stuff, or it's like, where were you? Oh, I was in hibernative sleep. I forgot the battle was on. I'm here now. What do you want?
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's another successful chapter to add to the Large Blast podcast roster there. If you want to use them, you will have to pay us royalties, but
I love that little dandy feel. It's cool.
Yeah. Cool. Well, so for the last part of the show, we like to do a little quiz, and what we're going to do is basically me, Welshie, and Matt. We're all going to pitch a book idea to you, and you have to decide which one you think is the best book idea, which one has the most legs commercially.
Right.
Don't expect them to be too serious, though.
No, they are terrible. I can only speak for myself, but mine is very bad. So you know what? I'll go first just to get it out of the way. So I want to open up Warhammer 40k to more people. I'm trying to pitch it. I'm trying to make a feel good, happy time Warhammer 40k movie. It's not been done before. So my story is about an Imperial Fist recruit who is top of the class. He's doing really well, but he's from a northern mining planet, and all he really wants to do is dance. But unfortunately, he's just too good at killing, so he's been forced into the Imperial Fists. Everything's going really well. So I've got a dandy feline here. So, but everything's going really well for him. But his heart's not in it. He's put those tap shoe things on the bottom of his boots. Everything. His heart is only in the dancing. Then the heresy happens, and Dawn is like, we've got to tear down the dance studio to make room for whatever. And he's like, no, and he does an interpretive dance so good he stops a section of the Imperial Fists from falling to chaos and starts a separate chapter called the Imperial Feet.
See, I thought you were going to pitch a title. I thought you were going to call it Fist Loose.
Oh yeah, Fist Loose. Good. Yeah, Fist Loose. Yeah, that would have been good. Yeah.
You're going to go down the whole Kevin Bacon route there, but
yeah, that's the sequel.
Yes, I like that. Yeah, so I like the interpretive dance thing. I think you definitely need a musical number in the middle there. I think that would be pretty good. We get Spielberg to direct the movie version. He did West Side Story. He could do that.
All right.
I like that. Yeah. I like that a lot. Yeah, I think that's definitely got legs.
Okay, cool.
So I'm gonna hopefully lean a little bit on your love of Marvel comics here, and my story is gonna be titled "The Multiverse Hype Train," which we're all gonna jump on board. I want you to imagine that the Great Rift is being closed. The Emperor's finally got off his ass, and the Great Rift is being closed, but a wormhole to a different universe has opened. And the Inquisition talked to the Assassinorum, and they decided the best thing to do is to send a hit team of assassins, I wonder where I got that idea from, through the wormhole to see what's going on. And the first planet they come across is Earth, and it's a planet full of mutants. It's an Earth protected by the X-Men. I want you to imagine Wolverine versus an Eversaw, a Calexus versus Professor X and Jean Grey, Vindicares versus Cable, Calidus versus Mystique. It's all going on. They're all fighting each other. And in classic Marvel terms, they realize they should be on the same side when Mr. Sinister starts splicing in chaos genes to the mutant population.
I like that. X-Men versus 40K. I like that. And I like the idea of, we need a 40K villain though. We can't be just Mr. Sinister. It's got to be him and someone else. Just got to team up with
Fabius and Sinister.
There you go. That's it. Yeah, so it's Mr. Sinister and Fabius.
Yeah.
Fabius follows the team through the wormhole because he wants to check out what's over there in the Marvel universe. Fabius teams up with Mr. Sinister. So we have 40K and Marvel on either side of the good bad guy sort of spectrum. I like that. I think that's pretty nifty.
Good.
That's kind of cool. I mean, X-Men have crossed over with other franchises before. They crossed over with Star Trek. There's no reason why they couldn't cross over with Warhammer. And considering now, if anybody from Marvel's listening, Marvel's got the 40K IP right now. With Marvel are doing, the Ultramarines comics and the Sisters of Battle comics. So, Welshie, I think that's got legs, man. I think you should pitch that one. Definitely.
Oh, yeah. I'm sending it in. It's on the back of an envelope at the moment, but I'll sort it out. I'll get it typed up nice.
All right, I'm going to go with mine.
We have to be pretty epic, Matt. There's a lot of pressure.
I know. That was pretty epic.
Top that,
right. My working title is The Halo Stars Final Generation. Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of His Majesty's starship Emperor's Light. Its continuing mission to explore forgotten star systems, to destroy all non-human intelligent life and any civilizations, to shine his light where it hasn't been before. Join Captain Tiberius and his crew in this action-packed story of an Imperial cruiser sent out to map and explore the little-known Halo stars.
Yeah, I like that. I like that one a lot. We made that joke ages back in the Heresy. We talked about the starship Inceptum, which is like Latin for enterprise, right? And how would you do Star Trek in the 40K universe? You think, well, for starters, you wouldn't have like an alien first officer because that wouldn't last very long, would it? Your number one appears to be an alien. Really? Well, take it out of the airlock, right? That's not I like to see. That's a lot of fun too. I think there's a lot of legs with that. Think of all the classic Star Trek stories you could do and give them a 40K spin, because most episodes would probably end with the captain going, exterminators.
Yeah.
That would be like 90% of the episode. Captain, we've encountered this strange alien creature. It appears to be controlling someone's mind. Kill everybody. That would pretty much be the ending for every episode of that.
Instead of taking one red shirt guy with you, you'd take 1,000 red shirts with you.
I'm imagining Data just as the most horrific servitor. Just
in
the background.
I personally have to believe that in the Warhammer universe, in the 40K universe, there's got to be, we've heard talk about kind of how there's hymnals and religious programming, but there's obviously got to be kind of the equivalent of television in the Warhammer universe, the HoloLens screens, right? There's got to be programs that they watch. I have to believe that there would be a version of Star Trek in the 40K universe, exactly like Matt's idea, right? It would be exactly the same idea. It would be propaganda about, and every week's episode would be an Imperial starship going to a planet of Xenos and going, destroy them for the good of the Imperium. And that would be like, every episode would end with, horrific destruction of Xenos and people saying how great the Emperor was. So I like that.
Yeah.
That's definitely, you got like, I can see 7 seasons of that on Imperial TV, definitely.
In the Hive City. Yeah.
Right. So which pitch do you think is the best? Who do you think has got the biggest legs?
I think what you guys have done is you've pitched me stuff that fits in 3 different mediums. Matt's feels like a TV show. Welshie, yours is definitely a comic book miniseries. Stoney, yours is a feature film. So I think all of these, we've got like a 360-degree media idea here. We could exploit all of these in different ways. I think they would all be great.
Oh, fantastic. Well, that's great. Sometimes everybody wins on the Lords of Lore. That's one of the rare occasions. So yeah. So yeah, thanks for joining us, James. Really appreciate it. You've illuminated a lot for us. And if there anything you're working on at the moment that you want to tell people out there about?
I am working on a new project for Black Library right now. Just started working on it at the beginning of the year. It hasn't been announced yet, so I can't say much about it.
Okay.
But
That's
it's,
exciting.
It's been interesting for me to I've been away for a while to come back. It's kind of like putting on a pair of comfortable shoes and meeting some old friends who I haven't written about for quite a while. So hopefully soon I'll be able to talk a little bit more about that.
Cool.
But that's going to be a lot of fun. And beyond that, I think the only other thing I've got coming up is, I believe, my Garrow compilation book, Weapon of Fate. I believe that's going to be becoming available again as a print on demand very soon. So that's the only other project I've got coming up right now. But keep watching this, guys. Follow me on Twitter @JMSwallow, or come to my website, which is just www.jswallow.com. And I post up there about all of my new stuff. So when I can talk about this new project, that's where I'll be talking about it.
We'll be watching that new book for the dandy felines if we see it in there.
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That was our chat with James Swallow. And what a nice man he was. He didn't have to come down here and talk to a bunch of sweaty dweebs about fucking made-up Warhammer cat factions, but he did it anyway. On this, the 50th episode of the longest running Warhammer podcast that's known to man.
No, it's not.
So if you've got any love for us, get out there and support him. Read his books. And we'll see you next time on the Large Blast podcast.